For those of you who have been to DASA meetings before, this is a monthly, during the semester, a monthly presentation get-together that we have that we sponsor out of the TechSAge grant. And it stands for Design and Technology for Healthy Aging. It's something that's been going on for, I don't know, Claudia, remind me, 7 or 8 years?
8 years.
8 years. And we're happy to do this, and it's led to a lot of good interactions, partnerships, collaborations over the years. So this month we're doing the meeting in conjunction with the TechSAge State of the Science Conference. So we're sponsoring this, we're having breakfast, we're going to do not just one lecture, but we'll do 2 lectures. Each lecture is followed by a panel of 3 speakers that will address either the topics or separate topics, either focusing on personal technologies or environmental technologies. And each speaker will talk about their own sort of perspective and field within those 2 areas. Each of those panels will be followed by a discussion with the panelists and the speaker in the personal or environmental technology area to sort of look at how we can take the intersections of all of the topics they're talking about and apply them specifically to aging and disability. This afternoon, actually, we're having some breakout groups for some of the experts that that are attending this morning. So the morning session is about seeding those breakout groups for people who are invited to help set an agenda for the future of what we might be doing related to research within the field. So with that, is there anything else I need to say? Is that still good? Okay, with that, we're going to start off with the environmental technology speaker, Andrew Sixsmith, and then we're going to have 3 panelists now sit in the front and make individual presentations. And I'm going to let all of the speakers introduce themselves this morning, because if it takes too long, I do it. And we're really going to get going. So with that, I'm going to let Andrew introduce himself, and he's our first speaker for the environmental technology area.
Okay. Okay, well, I'll introduce myself. I'm Andrew Sixsmith. I'm from Fraser University in British Columbia. As you can tell, probably from my accent, I'm not Canadian. I'm originally from England. I've been in Canada for about 10 years. I'm director of something called the Science and Technology for Aging Research Center, which has got a great acronym, which is STAR Institute. I didn't think of that one, but I think it's quite a good acronym. I'm also as you will see from the logo on the presentation here, I'm scientific director of something called AgeWell, which is a fairly new initiative in Canada around aging and technology. So we call ourselves Canada's Aging and Technology Network. So first of all, I'm going to start off by giving you an apology, because I'm not going to really talk about environmental sensors this morning, because I've done a lot of work in that area, but it's not really something I'm doing at the moment. So I wouldn't like to give you chapter and verse about this technology or that sort of technology. But what I'm really interested in, because I am scientific director of a network about the science, and particularly turning the science into real-world impact. So what I'm going to be talking about today is really about turning our ideas, the research that we do, into things that have real-world impact. Oh. Oh, okay.
Let's see. Try now.
The on button. Okay.
There you are.
Think.
You're welcome.
So it's these two?
This
Yep.
advances back.
Yep. Okay. AgeWell is something called a network of centers of excellence. So networks of centers of excellence are a program of research funding. It's probably Canada's biggest research program at the moment. So the idea is to mobilize, this is the aim of NCEs, to mobilize Canada's research talent in the academic, private, and public sectors and apply it to the task of developing the economy and improving the quality of life of Canadians. So NCE is a relatively large thing. So, for example, AgeWell over a 5-year period has about $36 million of federal funding in Canada, which makes it a pretty big deal for Canada. Just put things in context, the entire GDP of Canada is probably equivalent to the entire military budget of the USA. So you guys spend the entire GDP of Canada on military. So one sector of your economy is. So it puts things in perspective a little bit. So it's a big investment for Canada to do this this sort of thing. One of the reasons for this is that Canada sees itself as doing a lot of good science, but not particularly good at turning that science and the research into things which make money and help people. Interestingly, that may be changing. I was actually reading an interesting report yesterday about the number of patents. I find it difficult to say patent. Kind of get stuck there. The number of patents coming out of Canada has actually grown bigger than more in the last 10 years than the kind of the average for the world, and has actually grown more than the US. So something's north of the border from here. There is something's happening which is hadn't been realized, because Canada has a bit of a down on itself, as that we don't really do the translation of knowledge into the real world that well. That may be changing, and hopefully it's changing because of the sorts of things that these networks of centers of excellence do. So NCEs cover a lot of areas, so it's not just about aging and technology. It includes things like Arctic science, material science, the auto industry, that kind of thing. There's a lot of stuff in the health sector of which AgeWell sees itself. So, for example, one on here is called NeuroDevNet, which is a terrible acronym, but is about developmental disorders amongst children. I know those guys quite well because they're based in BC as well. Another one called Canadian Frailty Network, which is another area of research into aging, but focusing on frail seniors. So AgeWell was incorporated as a not-for-profit in November 2014, and NCEs potentially have a 15-year lifespan over 3 5-year funding cycles. So the idea is to, if this is an important area for the Canadian economy and society, we want to be in there for the long haul. So potentially AgeWell has a 15-year lifespan. We're 2 years into that. Our objectives are really to solve real-world problems that are faced by Canadian seniors and their families. And the thing about networks of centers of excellence is that we're not supposed to be research funding organizations. We're seen to be, or supposed to be, driving impact. So we're judged about the impact that we make from the research that we do. So the idea is that we have to work hard towards developing and transferring innovative products and services that will enhance the lives of seniors and caregivers, create new business opportunities, jobs and startups, and reduce the impact of population aging on things such as the demand for healthcare, financial aspects of population aging, and then also one area which I think is going to be really important in coming years, the impact of population aging on the workforce and the workplace, which is becoming a real focus of interest at the moment. What we're trying to do is to develop what we call a transdisciplinary understanding of technologies for healthy aging. And I think yesterday's talk was quite interesting. I think the word silo was mentioned several times. That's what I think one of the things that NCs are trying to do is to work outside the typical disciplinary boundaries that we tend to work within. So engineers do their stuff, business school does their stuff, the social sciences do it. But really, the sorts of things that we're trying to address here are what maybe could be referred to as wicked problems. I don't know, has anybody heard that concept before? The idea of a wicked problem, that are really so intractable that you really need to be very smart about how you're approaching that kind of issue. And really this requires more than one discipline, more than one area of expertise to really get this together. We also want to train a new generation of what we call highly qualified persons. These are basically postgraduate students, postdoctoral students, but also people who may be working, who are professionals, who are working in areas where they would benefit from understanding this sector in more detail. Establish strong networking and partnerships, and particularly also to commercialize and mobilize the intellectual property. We've started to develop a kind of a concept within our network that while we want to conduct world-class research, we basically believe in the network that the research will take care of itself, because that's what researchers do pretty well. They do research well. What they don't do particularly well is turn those ideas, that research, into real-world products. So I'll give you an overview of what AgeWell does. But what I'm particularly interested in talking to you about today is some of the challenges that we have to address as a research program when it comes to turning good ideas into real-world products and services. So we have a number of what we call work packages within AgeWell. These are projects grouped together in different areas. So we have a number of projects which are about understanding the needs of the user. We've got projects which are about technology development. I'm going to give you a quick overview of some of those projects. We've got work in areas of robotics and smart home systems support, older adults, assisting with issues around mobility. I was talking yesterday about power wheelchairs. So for example, making power wheelchairs more accessible to people with dementia, for example, is one of our areas of work. Products that enable greater social interaction, et cetera, et cetera. In many ways, some of the posters that we saw in the room back here, very much in the areas of work that we're doing within AgeWell. But we also have quite a lot of emphasis on what about the innovation side of these things? What do we need to do in terms of getting the right receptor capacity to adopt the technology? So, for example, we might have good projects which are coming out of our researchers in BC, say to support technology to support older people. But in BC, there's no the medical reimbursement system in BC doesn't actually pay for these kind of things. So we really need to develop policies which are going to help people to use technologies which hopefully would have a win-win scenario, keeps them independent and keeps them out of the more expensive hospital and long-term care environments. But the healthcare systems, the policies are often lagging well behind those kind of innovations. So just to give you a quick snapshot of some of the projects that we have. So this is I have real difficulties with his name. Thomas Hadjitropoulos. He's out of University of Alberta in Edmonton. Thomas is a great guy. He's very interested in the area of, in a lot of areas. The work he's doing at the moment is on using facial recognition technology to look at whether we can identify pain from the expressions of people with dementia, because quite often people with dementia are unable to articulate that themselves. A project in a completely different area is a project around digital storytelling. So this is Karen Moffat. I can't remember which university Karen's out of, but Karen has been working with one of my colleagues at SFU, David Kaufman, on the area of digital storytelling. This is really to kind of help people to tell their stories, okay, and connect with people across the generations. But digital storytelling also has a lot of opportunities with it because it allows people to have a voice. Many people who are quite marginalized can express and articulate what life is like for them. So for example, if we want to understand what it's like to be an older person living with a particular condition, that's very helpful when it comes to developing empathy and understanding of those conditions. So it's actually got some real-world applications. We've got a lot of interest in the area of robotics. Again, I was having a chat yesterday with Brenna, who's a where's Brenna? Here we are. Who's a roboticist. We've got interest in care robots, social robots. Also, one of our partners is Uber. So Uber have a big research program in autonomous vehicles. We've also got work in the area of exoskeletons and prosthetic robotics and things like that. We also are doing quite a lot of social science research, trying to understand the needs of different communities. And as you're probably aware, Canada is a vast country with a relatively small population. So for example, in British Columbia, the vast majority of people in British Columbia live in the Lower Mainland area around Vancouver. And then there's about 1,000 miles north where I've actually never dared to go, which obviously has very different needs, very different population, very different needs, but also very big challenges when it comes to delivery of health and social care. We also have very significant Indigenous communities in British Columbia who have, again, very different different needs. So what we're trying to do is to really understand these and try and identify some of the what those particular challenges are. But it's not always about problems. Okay, so one of the things that we're trying to do is that, well, if there are needs here, if we can develop products and services, are these things that can be developed locally? So are there opportunities for local startups to actually generate economic benefits from working in this area? And we have a number of things which we're trying to do in our network, which are aimed at broadly at knowledge mobilization. And I'm going to come to these in a few minutes in a bit more detail. So here's a slide just giving you an idea of what our network looks like. We have 29 universities across Canada. These figures are from last summer, so I think it says, September 2016. So this was after about a year of operation. We have 113 partners. So partners include university partners, but we have industry partners, we have federal organizations, provincial level organizations. All our projects are expected to have partners and are expected to have partner contributions. So we're not just about funding research. So this is meant to be a co-sponsored sponsored model. So the issue that I'm particularly interested in as director of this network is, well, okay, we do all this research, and despite all the research, and I come from a background of about 20 years working in large European projects on aging and technology. And I did a little bit of soul searching when we were developing AgeWell. And I thought, well, over the years I've been relatively good at bringing in research funds and been involved in very many research initiatives. So for example, there's something in Europe called the Active and Assisted Living Joint Program. Has anybody heard of that? Well, it's a program which is focusing basically on the areas like smart home technologies, personal technologies to support independent living of seniors. So very much the sort of things that are of interest within this group. The funding for the 5 years for ALJP was around about 1 billion euros for a 5-year period. So a huge amount of money is going into research in this area in Europe. And the major European program, which is currently called Horizon 2020, is on an even bigger scale than that. So vast amounts of money are going into funding research and development in this area. Yet, despite all this research, and despite a clear need, the real-world impact of these kinds of programs have been very, very limited. And even if I look at the networks of centers of excellence which have been designed in Canada to try and focus on real-world impact and outcomes, the tangible things that are coming out of this in terms of social and economic benefits have been relatively modest. So we typically do the science well. We typically do not do the technology transfer that well. So the challenge is innovation is actually very, very difficult in the aging and technology sector, and there are very many barriers to change. One of the areas of work that I've been doing over the years, which is not particularly related to technology, is around long-term care for seniors. And even when I go and visit long-term care facilities, nursing homes, residential homes, that kind of thing now, I'm looking at what's done there, what the life experience is, what the care model is. I'm looking at long-term care facilities and I'm thinking, well, there's very, very little change over the years. We talk about things For example, I was talking to Kim, who's over here, who's one of the great experts in person-centered care. Okay, so person-centered care is a great idea, but getting that into real-world practice is very, very challenging. And really, the aging sector generally, the healthcare sector, is a very, very difficult sector to innovate within. So we need to understand what those challenges are, what are the potential solutions, and what particularly is my network doing to meet these kinds of challenges. So really, what we've tried to do is focus on building capacity within our network, both in terms of supporting researchers and the work that they do in terms of technology transfer, working with partners to make sure that what we're doing is aligned with their needs as users of technologies, but also the producers and manufacturers of technologies, and also in particularly with our trainees. What do we need to do in terms of building capacity within our network of highly qualified persons? So working with researchers, there are significant issues within the research world that mitigate against the sorts of things that I'm talking about. So when you're an early career professor, you're judged by the papers you write, you're judged by the grants that you get in. In my university, you're given very, very little credit for turning those ideas into real world products. So there's some institutional barriers there. There's also the barriers that we hear about the actual process of doing this. So there's the valley of death, the so-called valley of death between science and application. I actually believe that there is a kind of a mountain of expectation that will never be ever be fulfilled at the start. Then there's the valley of death, and then you've got the plain of desolation further along, right? So you can tell I've read the Pilgrim's Progress. I do believe that we could write a story about this. But yeah, there's some very, very significant challenges even if you want to do this sort of thing. Okay, so I think AgeWell can do some work as a large network towards addressing some of the institutional barriers. We can work, we can lobby, we can work with federal and provincial agencies and say, well, okay, let's try and think about what science should be doing nowadays, because we're being told to create impact on the one hand, but then we have our hands tied behind our back on the other hand, right? So at an institutional level, we need to get our act in order. But also we need to provide the sorts of support to researchers to take their whatever intellectual property they're developing and get it out into the real world. It doesn't necessarily mean that you've got to do it yourself, but you've got to think about how you're going to do it. Okay, so all our research, for example, has a requirement for having a knowledge translation component to it. Now that's not unusual nowadays. So I believe most of the science funding councils in Canada, and I'm guessing the US, now will expect some sort of knowledge translation component. But it's usually pretty weak. What we're trying to do in AgeWell is to ramp that up very significantly. So 5 minutes, yeah. Okay, so one of the things that we're trying to do is to get people to think in product terms at a very, very, very early stage. Scientists are usually interested in the process of doing the research, about the writing of the papers and outputs from science. very few times do people think, well, what will my work look like right at the end point in terms of a real world thing, okay? Now that could be a technology, so we're very interested in technology in this room, but it also could be services around technology. It's also around policies as well, about regulations, about ethics, funding models. It's also about business processes as well. So these are all things which are outside the usual sort of engineering field. So what we're trying to do is to get people to think in very, very concrete terms and to bring these ideas right at an early stage. We also work with our projects on a very individual basis to monitor their progress down the so-called innovation pipeline. You probably may have come across the technology readiness level scale before. This kind of categorizes technology maturity according to a kind of a standard scale, from very early stage innovative research through to development, through to implementation, and then actual commercialization and deployment. So we monitor our projects very closely and ask people to tell us about what they're doing and justify where they are on that scale. And our programs of funding are really geared towards this. So we fund things in terms of early stage ideas, our Catalyst program. Those that are really good ideas, we turn into into big projects, into our co-projects. And those that in turn are delivering things which have economic and social potential, we give further funding in terms of our strategic investment program, which are targeted at these valleys of death and desolation boulevards and stuff. So just going through this very quickly. We run workshops to support people, because typically within our academic training, we're not given these sorts of training opportunities, focusing on our disciplines. So we need to think more commercially. We need to think about the opportunities. Often we think about old age as being a burden, but it's also about opportunities. It's about business opportunities. And thinking, well, where could we position our products and our services within these opportunities? I'm going to shift just to finish, looking at what we're doing with the training that we're putting in place to try and change the cultural attitudes that exist within research. We want to help people to get another win-win scenario, which is doing good science, but also to be able to turn those ideas into real things. And I don't believe that those things are mutually exclusive. I've tried to do that as much as possible in my life. Most of my research is applied, and I do believe I can publish in good academic journals, but also I can spend a lot of my time goes into trying to turn those ideas into products and services. We want to try and break down some of the academic silos and build awareness and skills in commercialization and knowledge mobilization. And we've put into place a program called Early Professionals Inspired Careers, which is another acronym, EPIC. And the idea is that we're very aware that our trainees are highly qualified personnel. I think there's some statistics in Canada which suggest that 80% of postdoctoral researchers will not get academic positions. So there's actually not a lot of point in training 80% of our population purely on the traditional academic model. So what we're trying to do is to put in place things which will help people to prepare for their future careers, and also to raise the awareness of some of the cross-cutting issues around aging and technology, so that those people are going to develop their ideas when they go to work in industry or in government. So I wanted to just give you a quick example. So the person on the top left-hand side here is a good example of one of our HQPs. So this is Lupin Battersby. So Lupin is a social scientist by background, and she started working for me a couple of years ago, not in the area of technology and aging to start with, but then she got more and more interested in it. And she started working on some of the projects in Age Well. She was working on the project to do with powered wheelchairs for people with dementia. But Lupin got inspired by the sorts of things that we're doing, and she actually took a course on technology and commercialization with our business school at SFU. So this was a postgraduate certificate. It was quite a big undertaking for her. What she did as a project was to do the commercialization plan for the powered wheelchair project. So putting Lupin on this course really added capacity to that team. It trained Lupin up in a completely new area for her, and really that's paid off now. Although Lupin has just told me she's resigning, she's actually going to work for one of the health authorities close by where we are as a knowledge mobilization broker. So Lupin is the sort of person which I think is going to be exactly the sort of thing that we want to, sort of person we want to turn out of Age Well. Somebody with a new set of skills which are really going to understand what are the issues and opportunities and potentials of technology that can be deployed within the healthcare system. So by investing in Lupin, we're actually building capacity within the receptor community from here. So even though she's losing, we're losing Lupin, we believe it's a win for us. So I'm going to draw it to a close there. I'm sorry I didn't talk a lot about the details of the technology, but I feel very passionate about this, is that really we've got, as scientists, we've got to get our act together more in terms of delivering things that are going to benefit the people that we're interested in. And it's something that I personally feel I could have done a better job in the past. So I'm using my own personal experience to say, well, we've got to do a better job on this in the future. Thank you very much.
We have time for maybe one question. You want to have maybe one question?
I'm not in academia. I actually am in the industry of aging, and I really appreciate your talk today. And I'm grateful because I think maybe there are people in the room that are wondering, how can I apply this outside of academia? And you hit the nail on the head. I have a testing company or I'm a testing company. I collaborate with Brad Fink, but I have Senior Select Seal, and we're testing products for use, which hopefully our plan to inspire other companies. But we look at products across the board, not just for aging. We tested wine glasses that are grips, like Govino wine glasses, which some people have heard of, to kitchen tools, to everyday products. Because we don't want like aging to look old, right? And when I hear that, I listen to students, it's disconcerting, and I listen to professors too. If you go into a senior community, you're not going to find old people there. They're having cocktail parties at 4 o'clock on Fridays. They are very active and very interactive, and they're a wasted source of information. So they're the national treasures that we have to learn from. And I love it when I'm the ambassador for Aging 2.0, which is, so I'm an ambassador for that. But I love the story we heard last year where students that were high school students actually went and lived for 6 months in one of the nursing homes and learned about their population. And if you academia could maybe integrate in that way, There's so many CCRCs, so much opportunity. So thank you for doing what you're doing and speaking about that. I think that's important.
Okay, I've been asked to repeat the question, but I can't.
Oh, well, there's
I would help you out, but I can't either.
Yeah, but I appreciate the comment, because you have hit on something which I didn't mention, and you're talking about how we should connect with the people who are going to use the technologies to really understand how those technologies are going to be used. I completely agree with you. We tend to, as scientists, stick within our labs, and in British Columbia, the two main universities are on hills. We literally have ivory towers in British Columbia. I love Georgia Tech because it's in the middle of a city, right? But SFU and University of British Columbia are built on top of mountains. Okay, so interestingly, we have another campus at SFU, which is in the nearby city of Surrey. So it's all part of the urban conglomerate of Vancouver. But the city of Surrey is very interesting. It's the most expanding city in British Columbia. Its hospital has got the most used emergency room in the whole of Canada, and has got one of the lowest budgets for healthcare in Canada. So there's a mismatch there. So there's some challenges. But what we've done is we've built a university campus on top of a shopping mall in Surrey. Okay, we are actually embedded within the community, and one of the things that I'm very keen on doing is developing a research facility which is open to the public, so that we can actually connect with the public in a very interactive sort of way. Because it's kind of intimidating, if you're just an ordinary person, to come into an academic environment. It's intimidating for me. So what it's like for the general public must be quite hard. But if we can create spaces which are open to everybody, but with a focus on, well, can we start to think about how we can co-create technologies together, then that's a really important starting point. So that's got to be part of our business of science more as well. Really getting to know and understand and empathizing with how these, what people's needs are and aspirations and desires as we go forward, as well as the more commercially minded things about, well, what are these opportunities going to look like in terms of a real service. I'll give you an example of a company that I've been working with in British Columbia. We've done a lot of research on the so-called digital divide, that many older people are excluded from the digital economy because maybe they don't have the skills, they don't have enough money to pay for broadband internet, that kind of thing. But there's a company in British Columbia which is specifically about helping older people to get connected. Okay, so I'm more than happy to work with that company to develop, use the expertise we have in gerontology to try and expand their business. I have no worries myself about giving intellectual property like that away. I'm there as a scientist who can work on an area that is both intellectually interesting, but also has something which is going to have a tangible outcome for that company.
Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, thank you.